You ever have one of those moments where you say something completely ordinary and it just spirals into something absolutely insane? Like you mentioned the weather to someone at a bus stop and suddenly you're being invited to their cousin's wedding in another state, that kind of thing. Well, imagine that, but the stakes are way higher and the person you're talking to has enough money to buy a small country. That's basically what happened to a waitress named Claire Donovan, and honestly, the whole thing is so bizarre you'd think someone made it up for a movie. But no, this actually happened. And the ripple effects of one tiny misunderstanding changed her entire life in ways she never could have predicted. It's one of those stories that makes you realise how fragile our assumptions about people really are, and how quickly things can go completely off the rails when those assumptions are wrong. So Claire Donovan was 26 years old, working double shifts at a place called the Meridian Club. Not as a member, obviously, as a waitress. The Meridian Club was one of those ultra-exclusive private dining establishments where the membership fee alone was probably more than most people make in a year. We're talking old money, new money, tech billionaires, politicians, people who own things you've heard of. The kind of place where the silverware probably costs more than a used car, and they have a separate fork for every course. Claire had been working there for about 3 years, and she was good at her job. Polite, efficient, knew how to be invisible when the members wanted privacy, and attentive when they needed something. She was basically a ghost in a black uniform, which is exactly what they wanted. The thing about working at a place like the Meridian Club is that you see things. You hear things. You learn pretty quickly that rich people are just people, except with more resources to be weird or demanding or sometimes surprisingly kind. Claire had served tech CEOs who tipped 200% and left her handwritten thank you notes. She'd also served hedge fund managers who snapped their fingers at her like she was a dog and complained that their water wasn't cold enough. You get a mix. But the one thing you learn fast is to never, ever assume you're part of their world. Your staff, you're there to facilitate their experience, not to participate in it. That's the unspoken rule. On this particular evening, Claire was working the main dining room. It was a Thursday, which was usually pretty busy because a lot of the members had standing weekly reservations. She was juggling about 6 tables, all high maintenance in their own special ways. One table had a guy who kept sending his steak back because it wasn't the exact temperature he wanted, even though he kept describing it in vague terms like medium but not too medium. Another table had a woman who wanted to know the provenance of every single ingredient in her salad, like she was conducting a forensic investigation into the lettuce. Standard stuff, really. Claire was tired, her feet hurt, and she was counting down the hours until her shift ended and she could go home and collapse. Then this woman walked in. Her name was Vivian Ashford, and she was apparently a very big deal. Claire didn't recognise her at first because honestly, after a while, all the wealthy members kind of blur together into a general impression of expensive clothing and confident posture. But Vivian Ashford was different. She was probably in her early 60s, impeccably dressed in this elegant navy suit that probably cost more than Claire's monthly rent. She had this presence about her, the kind of presence that makes a room go a little quieter when she enters. The maitre d' practically tripped over himself to greet her and escort her to her usual table, which was this prime spot by the window overlooking the city skyline. Claire wasn't assigned to Vivian's table initially. Another server, Marcus, a guy who took care of all the VIP members, was supposed to take care of her. But Marcus got pulled away to deal with some crisis in the kitchen, something about a missing shipment of truffles or whatever, and the floor manager frantically gestured at Claire to cover the table. Claire took a deep breath, grabbed a menu, and walked over. She did her usual polite greeting, introduced herself, asked if Mrs. Ashford would like to start with something to drink. Vivian looked up at her, and there was this moment, this weird little pause where Vivian's eyes kind of narrowed and she studied Claire's face like she was trying to place her. "Have we met before?" Vivian asked. Her voice was smooth, cultured, the kind of voice that's used to being listened to. Claire blinked, a little thrown off. "I don't think so, ma'am," she said politely. "I've been working here for a few years, so maybe you've seen me around the club." Vivian shook her head slowly. "No, that's not it. You look remarkably like someone I used to know. The resemblance is quite striking." Claire didn't really know what to say to that, so she just smiled and waited. You learn not to engage too much in personal conversations with members. Polite but professional. That's the line. But then Vivian said something that would turn out to be the start of the whole insane chain of events. She said, "You have the same bone structure as the Whitmore family. Are you related to the Whitmores of Connecticut by any chance?" And here's where Claire made her first mistake, though, honestly, how was she supposed to know it was a mistake? She laughed. Not in a rude way, just in a sort of surprised, slightly self-deprecating way. "No, ma'am," she said. "I'm not related to anyone important. My family's from Ohio. Pretty ordinary background." She said it casually, just trying to politely deflect the question and move on to taking the drink order. But Vivian's expression didn't change. If anything, she looked even more intrigued. "Ohio," she repeated, like she was testing the word. "There was a branch of the family that moved to the Midwest in the 80s. Bit of a scandal at the time, fell out of touch with the main line." She was still studying Claire's face, and Claire was starting to feel uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being looked at this closely by members. Usually they barely glanced at the staff. "What's your surname, dear?" Vivian asked. "Donovan," Claire said, because what else was she going to say? It was her name. Claire Donovan. Vivian's eyes lit up, actually lit up, like she'd solved a long-standing enigma. Margaret, she married a Donovan. They cut ties with the family. She then moved to Ohio. Vivian was looking absolutely delighted. "I think you might be part of the Whitmore family and not even know it, dear girl. Does the name Margaret Whitmore mean anything to you? Would she have been your grandmother, perhaps?" Claire's mind was racing. Her grandmother's name was Margaret Donovan, but she didn't actually know what her grandmother's maiden name was. Her grandmother had died when Claire was little, and her family wasn't really the type to keep detailed records or talk much about family history. They were practical people. They didn't care about genealogy or ancestry or any of that stuff. But Margaret was a pretty common name, right? This had to be a coincidence. "My grandmother's name was Margaret," Claire admitted slowly. "But I really don't think she was connected to any prominent family. We're pretty normal." Vivian waved a hand dismissively. That's exactly what someone from the estranged branch would think. The family lost touch with that whole side after the marriage. Margaret was written out of the will, I believe. Terribly old-fashioned of them, but that's how it was done back then. She was absolutely convinced now, Claire could tell. And Claire was standing there with a menu in her hand, completely frozen, because this conversation had gone so far off the rails from a normal customer interaction that she had no idea how to steer it back. "I really should take your drink order," Claire tried weakly, but Vivian was not interested in drinks anymore. She was interested in this whole Whitmore connection theory she'd constructed. "This is extraordinary," Vivian said, and she actually reached out and took Claire's hand, which was definitely crossing about 15 professional boundaries. "You must let me look into this. I know the Whitmore family quite well. If you're one of them, even from the distant branch, they want to know. You'd have connections, opportunities. This could change everything for you." Claire wanted to say that she was fine, that she didn't need her life changed, that this was probably just a weird coincidence and could they please just order food like normal people. But Vivian was on a roll. She pulled out her phone, one of those expensive phones that probably cost more than Claire's laptop, and started typing something. "I'm going to reach out to Edward Whitmore. He's the current head of the family. I'm having a gathering at my estate this Saturday, just a small dinner party, very intimate. You must come. We'll sort this all out properly." And that's when Claire realised she was in serious trouble, because Vivian Ashford wasn't asking. She was telling. And when someone like Vivian Ashford tells you you're coming to their estate for dinner, you don't really have a lot of room to say no, especially not when you're standing there in your waitress uniform, still technically on the clock, with your manager probably watching from across the room, wondering why you're having an extended conversation with one of the club's most important members instead of taking her order. "I appreciate the offer, Mrs. Ashford," Claire started, trying to find a polite way out, "but I'm not sure I'm who you think I am." Vivian smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she was used to getting her way. Nonsense. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. I'll have my assistant send you the details. You do have an email address, don't you? What was Claire supposed to say? Of course she had an email address which Vivian typed into her phone with surprising speed for someone her age, and then Vivian finally, mercifully, ordered a glass of wine and released Claire back into the wild. Claire spent the rest of her shift in a daze. She kept replaying the conversation in her head, trying to figure out where exactly it had gone wrong. She'd just been trying to be polite. She'd answered questions. And somehow that had resulted in an invitation to a dinner party at a billionaire's estate based on the absolutely insane theory that she was secretly related to some prominent Connecticut family. The whole thing was ridiculous. Except on Friday morning, Claire's phone pinged with an email from someone named Judith, who identified herself as Vivian Ashford's personal assistant. The email was professional, formal, and included detailed directions to the Ashford estate, a suggested dress code which was described as cocktail attire, elegant but not overly formal, and a polite note that Mrs. Ashford was very much looking forward to seeing her tomorrow evening. Claire stared at her phone. This was actually happening. She thought about just not going. She could ignore the email, block the number, pretend the whole thing never happened. But the problem was Vivian Ashford was a regular at the Meridian Club. She'd see Claire again. And if Claire just didn't show up, that would be incredibly rude. And rudeness to a member, especially a prominent member like Vivian, could get her fired. Her manager would not be sympathetic to, I didn't go to her party because I thought the whole thing was weird. That wasn't how things worked. So Claire found herself doing something she never thought she'd do, which was frantically texting her friend Rachel asking if she could borrow a cocktail dress because apparently she was going to a billionaire's dinner party tomorrow and had nothing appropriate to wear. Rachel, to her credit, didn't ask too many questions. She just showed up at Claire's apartment with 3 dresses and helped Claire figure out which one looked the least like she was playing dress up in someone else's clothes. They settled on a simple black dress that was elegant enough to not be embarrassing, but not so fancy that Claire felt like a complete fraud. Rachel also insisted on doing Claire's makeup and hair, which Claire protested but secretly appreciated because she had no idea what cocktail attire elegant but not overly formal actually meant in practice. Saturday evening arrived faster than Claire wanted it to. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress fit well. Rachel had done her hair in this sort of loose, elegant updo thing. She looked like she could maybe, possibly, belong at a fancy dinner party. From a distance, if no one looked too closely. She took a deep breath, grabbed her keys, and headed out to her car, which was a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a check engine light that had been on for 6 months. The contrast between her car and where she was going was almost funny. Almost. The drive to the Ashford estate took about 40 minutes, and with every mile, Claire's anxiety increased. What was she doing? This was insane. She was a waitress crashing a rich person's dinner party based on a case of mistaken identity. Except she wasn't crashing, she'd been invited, but still, the whole thing felt surreal. When she finally turned onto the private road that led to the estate, she started to seriously consider just turning around. But then she saw the house, and her brain kind of short-circuited. It wasn't a house, it was a mansion. A legitimate, sprawling, probably has 20 bedrooms kind of mansion with actual columns and a circular driveway with a fountain in the middle. There were already several cars parked there, all of them expensive. Mercedes, BMW, something that might have been a Bentley, and then her sad little Honda Civic. A valet approached as she pulled up. A valet. Claire had not anticipated there would be a valet. She got out of her car, trying to act like this was totally normal, and handed him her keys. He was professional enough not to react to the state of her car, which she appreciated. Another staff member, a woman in a formal uniform, greeted her at the door and asked for her name. Claire Donovan, she said, and the woman checked a list, found her name and smiled. Welcome, Miss Donovan. Mrs. Ashford is in the drawing room with the other guests, right this way. Claire followed her through a foyer that was bigger than her entire apartment. There was actual marble flooring, a chandelier that probably weighed more than her car, oil paintings on the walls that looked old and important. She tried not to gawk. The staff member led her down a hallway and into a large, beautifully decorated room where about a dozen people were standing around with drinks, engaged in polite conversation. Vivian Ashford spotted her and immediately broke away from the group she was talking to, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "Claire! You came! I'm so delighted!" She took both of Claire's hands in hers, which again felt like a violation of personal space. But Claire was starting to realise that Vivian just operated on a different set of social rules. "Thank you for inviting me," Claire said, "because what else do you say?" Vivian turned to the room and raised her voice slightly. "Everyone, I want you to meet Claire Donovan. She may very well be part of the Whitmore family, isn't that extraordinary?" And just like that, Claire became the centre of attention in a room full of people who probably had a combined net worth in the hundreds of millions. Several people looked intrigued. One older man with silver hair actually walked over and studied her face like she was a painting. "The resemblance is remarkable," he said to Vivian. "If she's Margaret's granddaughter, that would make her Edward's second cousin, wouldn't it?" This was spiralling so fast, Claire opened her mouth to try to explain that this was probably all a huge misunderstanding. But before she could say anything, Vivian was introducing her to everybody. "This is Edward's brother, and this is Catherine, their sister, and this is..." The names kept coming. Everyone was polite, curious, asking her questions about her family, her background. Claire tried to answer honestly. She talked about Ohio, about her parents, about her grandmother Margaret, who she barely remembered. But every piece of information she gave seemed to confirm rather than dispel Vivian's theory. Someone brought her a glass of wine. She sipped it because she needed something to do with her hands. The conversation swirled around her. People were discussing family trees, trying to figure out exactly where she fit in. If she fit in. Claire felt like she was watching it all happen from outside her body. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But it was, and she was standing in a billionaire's drawing room, surrounded by people who thought she was one of them, and she had no idea how to make it stop. And then, to make it worse, to make the whole thing even more surreal, the women Vivian had introduced her to as Edward's sister turned to Claire with this warm, almost motherly smile and said, "You must be exhausted from all this attention. Why don't you come sit with me for a moment? We can talk properly." So Claire found herself being guided to a small seating area near the window, Catherine on one side, another older woman whose name she'd already forgotten on the other, and they were asking her questions that felt friendly but also kind of probing maybe, like they were trying to figure out if she was legitimate or if she was some kind of imposter. Which was fair enough because Claire was also trying to figure that out. Catherine asked about her grandmother Margaret again, and Claire told her what little she knew, that Margaret had died when Claire was maybe 6 or 7, that she'd been quiet, kind of distant, didn't talk much about her past, that Claire's mother had always said Margaret came from a well-off family back east, but that there'd been some kind of falling out, and she'd left and never went back. A falling out, Catherine repeated, nodding slowly like that explained everything. That would fit with what we know about Margaret's aunt, our father's sister. She left. In the late 60s, I think, maybe early 70s. No one really talked about why. It was one of those family secrets that just got buried. Claire felt a chill run through her. Family secrets. She was sitting in a mansion drinking wine that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck, surrounded by people who were casually discussing family secrets like they were normal, and she was supposedly part of this. It didn't feel real. It felt like a movie, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The other woman, whose name Claire thought might be Patricia, leaned in and said, "Do you have any photographs of Margaret?" From when she was younger? That might help us confirm the connection. Photographs. Claire thought about the shoebox in her closet back in Ohio, the one her mum had given her after Margaret died. There were maybe a dozen old photos in there, black and white, some in colour, but faded. She'd looked through them a few times over the years, but they'd never meant much to her, just pictures of a woman she barely remembered. "I think so," Claire said. "Back at my parents' house. I'd have to ask my mum to look." Vivian, who had drifted back over to their little group, clasped her hands together. Oh, that would be wonderful. If you could have them sent here or scanned and emailed, we could compare them to the family archives. Edward has boxes and boxes of old photographs. I'm sure we could find a match. This was getting out of hand. Claire wanted to say that, wanted to pump the brakes on this whole thing, but everyone was looking at her with such expectation, such excitement, and she didn't know how to shut it down without seeming rude or ungrateful. So instead, she just nodded and said, "I'll ask my mum," and took another sip of wine. The conversation moved on. People started talking about other things, about some charity event that was coming up, about someone's vacation in the south of France, about a business deal that had just closed. Claire sat there trying to follow along, but it was like listening to a foreign language. These people lived in a different world, a world where vacations in the south of France were casual topics of conversation, where charity galas were just another Tuesday, where business deals involved amounts of money that Claire couldn't even conceptualize. And they thought she was one of them. Or might be. Possibly. At some point, dinner was announced. The staff member from earlier appeared in the doorway and said something to Vivienne, who clapped her hands lightly and said, "Wonderful. Everyone, shall we move to the dining room?" The dining room was, predictably, enormous. A long table that could probably seat 20 people, set with china and crystal and more silverware than Claire knew what to do with. She found herself seated between Jonathan, Edward's brother, and a younger man who introduced himself as David something, a cousin or a friend of the family. She wasn't sure. The food was incredible. Course after course of things Claire couldn't pronounce, prepared by what was obviously a professional chef. She tried to eat slowly, to follow the lead of the people around her, to use the right fork at the right time. She was pretty sure she messed it up at least twice, but no one said anything. Jonathan was nice. He asked her about her job, about working at the diner, and he seemed genuinely interested. Not in a condescending way, but in a way that made Claire think maybe he wasn't as removed from normal life as the others. He told her he'd worked in restaurants when he was younger, before the family business took over his life, and he missed it sometimes. The simplicity of it, he said, the straightforwardness. David, on the other side, was quieter. He mostly listened, occasionally asking a question, but he had this way of looking at her that made Claire feel like he was trying to figure her out. Not in a suspicious way exactly, but in a curious way, like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve. Halfway through the meal, Vivienne stood and tapped her glass with a knife, getting everyone's attention. "I just want to say," she began, her voice warm and a little emotional, "how special this evening is. It's not often we get to welcome someone new into the family, especially under such extraordinary circumstances." She looked at Claire. "Claire, whether or not the DNA test confirms what we all suspect, I want you to know that you are welcome here. You are part of this now." People murmured in agreement. Someone raised their glass. Claire felt her face flush. She wanted to disappear. This was too much, way too much. But she raised her glass too, because what else could she do? And she smiled and nodded and tried not to. After dinner, people started to leave. Vivienne insisted that Claire stay a little longer, said she wanted to show her something. So Claire found herself following Vivienne upstairs, down another hallway, into what looked like a library or a study. There were floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk, and on one wall, a series of framed photographs. Family photographs, Claire realised. Vivienne walked over to them and pointed to one in particular. It was old, black and white, showing a young woman with dark hair and a serious expression. She was standing next to a man in a suit, and there were 2 children in front of them, a boy and a girl. "That's Edward's grandparents," Vivienne said, "and those are his father and his aunt." His aunt, Margaret. Claire stared at the photograph. The woman, Margaret, had the same dark hair as the woman in the photos in Claire's shoebox. The same serious expression. It could be her. It probably was her. "She looks like my grandmother," Claire said quietly. Vivienne smiled. "She looks like you." And that was the thing, wasn't it? Claire had spent her whole life thinking she was just Claire Donovan from Ohio. Daughter of a school teacher and an accountant, granddaughter of a woman who died when she was too young to really know her. But now she was standing in a mansion, looking at a photograph of a woman who might be her great-grandmother, and everything she thought she knew about herself was shifting. Vivian put a hand on her shoulder. "But I really do think this is fate. You were meant to find us, or we were meant to find you. Either way, I'm so glad you're here." Claire didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and kept staring at the photograph, trying to see herself in the faces of these people she'd never known. When she finally left, it was late, past midnight maybe. Vivian walked her to the door, gave her another hug, made her promise to send those photographs of Margaret as soon as possible. Claire promised. She got into her car, which looked ridiculous parked in front of the mansion, and she sat there for a minute, just trying to process everything that had happened. She walked into that party thinking she was going to smile politely, eat some fancy food, and leave. But instead, she'd been pulled into something much bigger. Something that involved family trees and DNA tests, and the possibility that her entire understanding of who she was might be wrong. She drove back to her apartment, which felt even smaller and shabbier than usual after spending the evening in a mansion. She texted her mom, asked her to look for the shoebox with Margaret's photos. Her mom replied almost immediately, asking what was going on. Claire didn't know how to explain it, so she just said she'd call her tomorrow and tell her everything. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night in her head. The faces, the conversations, the photograph of Margaret. The way Vivian had looked at her like she was something precious. The way the others had accepted her, or at least seemed to, even though she was a stranger. It didn't make sense. But maybe it did. Maybe this was real. Maybe she really was part of the Whitmore family. And if she was, what did that mean? What was she supposed to do with that information? She didn't have answers. Just a lot of questions and a growing sense that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. She woke up the next morning with a headache, which was stupid because she hadn't even been drinking. Just stress, probably. The kind of stress that comes from having your entire sense of identity called into question by a bunch of rich people in a mansion. She made coffee, checked her phone, 3 missed calls from her mom, a text from Vivian, asking if she'd had a chance to look for those photos yet. It was 9 a.m. The woman was relentless. Claire called her mom back, explained the whole thing, or tried to. The party, the Whitmores, the photograph of Margaret, the DNA test they wanted her to take. Her mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your grandmother never talked about her family. I asked her once when you were little, and she just said they were gone, all of them. I figured maybe they'd died, or maybe there'd been some kind of falling out. She didn't want to talk about it, so I didn't push." "Do you think she was lying?" Claire asked. "About who she was?" "I don't know," her mum said. "Maybe. Or maybe she just wanted to forget. People do that sometimes. Start over, leave the past behind." She paused. "Do you want me to send you the photos?" "Yeah," Claire said. "I need to know." The photos arrived 2 days later in a manila envelope that her mom had overnighted. Claire opened it on her kitchen table, and there they were. 5 photographs, all black and white, all a little faded. Margaret as a young woman, standing in front of a house. Margaret holding a baby. Margaret sitting on a park bench looking off to the side. And then 2 more, closer shots of her face. She looked serious in all of them. Not unhappy exactly, but not smiling either. Just serious. Thoughtful, maybe. Claire took pictures of the pictures with her phone and sent them to Vivian. Got a reply within minutes. "Oh my God, Claire, that's her. That's definitely her. Can I show these to the family?" Claire said yes, because what else was she supposed to say? She felt like she was giving away something that didn't belong to her. But then again, if Margaret really was a Whitmore, maybe the photos belonged to them more than they belonged to Claire. She didn't know. Everything felt upside down. Vivian called her that afternoon. "We need to do the DNA test," she said. "I know it sounds invasive, but it's only way to know for sure. And honestly, Claire, I'm already sure. But the rest of the family, they need proof. You understand, right?" Claire understood. Rich people didn't just hand over their legacy to some random waitress based on a few old photographs. They needed science. They needed data. So she agreed. Vivian said she'd send over a kit, one of those mail-in ones where you spit in a tube and send it back. Simple. Easy. Except it didn't feel simple or easy. It felt huge. The kit arrived the next day. Claire stared at it for a while before opening it. It was just a box, just a plastic tube, just a prepaid envelope. But it felt like more than that. It felt like she was about to open a door she couldn't close. She did it anyway. Spit in the tube, sealed it, mailed it back. And then she waited. Waiting was the worst part. Vivian texted her every couple of days, just checking in, asking how she was doing. Claire appreciated it, kind of, but it also made her feel like she was already part of something she hadn't agreed to yet. Like the family had already decided she belonged to them, and now they were just waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. 3 weeks later, the results came back. Vivian called her, and Claire could hear the excitement in her voice before she even said anything. "It's a match," Vivian said. "You're Margaret's great-granddaughter. You're family, Claire. You're one of us." Claire sat down on her couch. She'd been expecting it, sort of, but hearing it confirmed was different. It made it real. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Like, what happens now?" "Well," Vivian said, and Claire could hear her smiling, "that's up to you. But the family wants to meet you properly, not at a party, somewhere quieter. We were thinking dinner, maybe next weekend, just you and a few of us. Nothing overwhelming." Nothing overwhelming. Claire almost laughed. The whole thing was overwhelming, but she said yes anyway, because what else was she going to do? She was part of the Whitmore family now, apparently. She couldn't just ignore that. The dinner was at Vivian's house, which was somehow even bigger than the mansion where the party had been. Claire wore the same dress she'd worn to the party because it was the only nice thing she owned, and she drove there in her car that made a weird rattling noise the whole way. She felt like an imposter again, pulling up to the circular driveway, parking next to a row of cars that probably cost more than her yearly salary. Vivian answered the door, gave her a hug, led her inside. The house was quieter than the party had been. Just a few people in the dining room sitting around a table that looked like it could seat 20 but only had 6 chairs set up. Vivian introduced her. "This is Edward, Margaret's son. Your great-uncle, technically." Edward was older, maybe in his 70s, with white hair and kind eyes. He stood up, shook her hand, said he was glad to finally meet her. "This is his daughter, Natalie." Natalie was younger, maybe 40, and she smiled at Claire but didn't say much. "And this is Gregory, Edward's brother." Gregory didn't stand up. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "So, you're the waitress," he said. Claire felt her face flush. "Yeah," she said. "I work at a catering company." "Worked," Vivian corrected. "You don't have to do that anymore, Claire. You're family now." Claire didn't know what to say to that. She sat down in the chair Vivian pulled out for her, and someone, a woman in a uniform, brought out plates of food. Fancy food, the kind Claire had served at 100 events but never actually eaten. She picked at it, trying to follow the conversation, which was mostly about people she didn't know and places she'd never been. Edward asked her about her life, what she did, where she grew up, what her plans were. Claire answered as best she could, but it all felt inadequate. She was a waitress from Ohio. She didn't have plans, not really. She'd been trying to save up enough money to go back to school, maybe, but that was as far as her ambitions went. "Well," Edward said, "you're part of the family now. That changes things." He looked at Vivian, then back at Claire. "We've been talking, and we think it's only right that you be included in the family trust. Not the whole thing, of course, but a portion. Enough to make sure you're taken care of." Claire stared at him. "What?" "The family trust," Edward repeated. "It's how we manage the estate. Everyone in the family gets a share. You're Margaret's descendant, so you're entitled to a share too." "I don't understand," Claire said. "How much are we talking about?" Vivian leaned forward. "Enough that you'd never have to work again," she said. "If you didn't want to." Claire felt like the room was spinning. She'd come here thinking she was just going to have dinner, meet some relatives, maybe get some answers about her grandmother. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected them to just hand her money, a life, a future she hadn't asked for. "I don't know if I can accept that," she said. Gregory laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. "Of course you can," he said. "You'd be stupid not to." "Gregory," Edward said, his voice sharp. "That's enough." "I'm just saying," Gregory continued, ignoring his brother. "She shows up out of nowhere, claims to be family, and now she's acting like she doesn't want the money. It's ridiculous." "I'm not acting," Claire said, her voice louder than she intended. "I'm just trying to process this. A month ago, I was serving drinks at a party. Now you're telling me I'm part of some family trust and I never have to work again. That's not normal." "It's not normal for you," Gregory said. "But it's normal for us." Claire stood up. She couldn't do this. She couldn't sit here and be insulted by some old man who thought she was a gold digger or a liar or whatever he thought she was. "I should go," she said. "No, wait," Vivian said, standing up too. "Claire, please." "Don't let Gregory ruin this. He's just protective of the family. We all are. But you belong here. You're one of us." "I don't feel like one of you," Claire said. And it was true. She didn't. She felt like a stranger, an outsider, someone who'd stumbled into a world she didn't understand and didn't belong in. Edward stood up too, walked over to her. "I understand this is a lot," he said. "And I'm sorry if we're overwhelming you. But please, don't leave. Not yet. Stay. Have dessert and we can talk more. No pressure, no decisions tonight. Just talk." Claire looked at him. He seemed sincere, kind even, and Vivian was looking at her with those hopeful eyes, and Natalie was nodding, and even Gregory had the decency to look a little bit ashamed of himself. So she sat back down. She stayed. She had dessert, which was some kind of chocolate thing that probably cost more than her rent, and they talked. Not about money or trusts or family legacies, just small talk. Normal stuff. And it was nice, kind of. For a little while, she almost felt like she belonged. But when she left that night, driving home in her rattling car, she still didn't know what she was going to do. The Whitmores wanted her to be part of their family. They wanted to give her money, a place in their world. And part of her wanted that. Of course, she did. Who wouldn't want financial security? A family, a sense of belonging? But another part of her was terrified. Terrified of what it would mean to accept. Terrified of losing herself in their world. Terrified of becoming someone she didn't recognize. She spent the next few days in a kind of fog, going through the motions at work, smiling at customers, taking orders, bringing food. But her mind was somewhere else, stuck in that dining room with the Whitmores, replaying the conversation over and over, the money, the trust fund, the invitation to join their world. It all felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else, not her. Marcy noticed, of course. She always noticed. "You've been weird all week," she said one afternoon when they were folding napkins in the back. "What's going on?" "Did something happen at that dinner?" Claire shrugged. "It was fine. Just overwhelming, I guess." "Overwhelming? How?" Claire didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that a family of millionaires wants to adopt you into their world? How do you explain that you're being offered a life most people only dream about, and you're not sure if you want it? "They want me to be part of the family," she said finally. "Like, officially. They set up a trust fund for me and everything." Marcy's eyes went wide. "A trust fund? Claire, that's insane. How much?" "I don't know. Edward said it was substantial, whatever that means." "Substantial probably means a lot," Marcy said. "Like a lot. So what's the problem? Why do you look like someone just told you your dog died?" "I don't know," Claire said. And she didn't. She couldn't put her finger on why the whole thing made her feel so uneasy. Maybe it was the way Gregory had looked at her, like she was some kind of imposter. Or maybe it was the way Vivian had been so eager, so insistent, like she needed Claire to say yes. Or maybe it was just that Claire had spent her whole life being nobody, and the idea of suddenly being somebody felt impossible. "I think you're overthinking this," Marcy said. "They're offering you money. Free money. You'd be crazy to turn that down." "Maybe," Claire said. But she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure about any of it. A week later, Vivian called her. Claire almost didn't answer. She'd been avoiding her phone, avoiding everything really, but something made her pick up. "Claire, darling," Vivian said, her voice warm and cheerful. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, it's fine. I'm just at home." "Good. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I know the dinner was a lot, and I'm sorry if we overwhelmed you. That wasn't our intention." "It's okay," Claire said. "I'm just still processing everything." "Of course you are. It's a lot to take in, but I wanted to let you know that we're here for you, whatever you need, and there's no pressure, Claire, none at all. If you need time to think about things, that's perfectly fine." Claire wasn't sure she believed that. There was always pressure, even when people said there wasn't. But Vivian sounded sincere, and Claire wanted to believe her. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate that. There is one thing, though," Vivian said, and Claire's stomach tightened. "Here it comes," she thought. "The catch. We're having a small gathering next weekend. Just family and a few close friends. Nothing formal, just a casual get-together at the estate. I'd love for you to come. It would be a good opportunity for you to meet everyone in a more relaxed setting." Claire hesitated. She didn't know if she was ready for another Whitmore event. The last one had left her feeling like a fish out of water, and she wasn't sure she wanted to go through that again. But Vivian was waiting for an answer, and Claire didn't know how to say no without sounding rude. "Okay," she said. "I'll be there." "Wonderful," Vivian said, and Claire could hear the smile in her voice. "I'll send you all the details. And Claire, I'm really glad you're giving us a chance." The gathering was exactly what Vivian had promised. Casual, relaxed, nothing like the formal dinner. There were maybe 20 people there, scattered around the Whitmore estate, drinking wine and eating fancy finger foods. Claire felt out of place, but less so than before, maybe because everyone was dressed down, or maybe because she was starting to get used to the whole thing. She talked to a few people, cousins and family friends who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. Natalie was there, and she introduced Claire to her husband, a quiet man who worked in finance and seemed nice enough. Even Gregory was there, though he kept his distance, watching Claire from across the lawn with that same suspicious look. Edward found her eventually, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. "Thanks," Claire said, taking a sip. It was good wine. Really good. The kind of wine she could never afford. "How are you holding up?" Edward asked. "I'm okay," Claire said. "It's less intense than the dinner." "Good. That was the idea. Vivian wanted you to feel more comfortable. See that we're not all stuffy and formal all the time." Claire smiled. "I appreciate that." They stood there for a moment watching the other guests mingle. It was peaceful, kind of. The sun was setting, casting everything in a warm golden light, and for a moment Claire could almost imagine herself belonging here. Almost. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why do you care so much?" "About me, I mean. You didn't even know I existed until a few weeks ago." Edward was quiet for a moment, thinking. "That's a fair question," he said. "I guess it's because family matters to us. It always has. And when we found out about you, about your connection to Catherine, it felt like we'd been given a second chance. A chance to make things right." "Make what right?" Edward sighed. "My grandmother, she had a hard life. She lost her daughter, your grandmother, when she was very young, and I think she always felt like she'd failed her somehow, like she could have done more, been more. And then she spent the rest of her life trying to make up for it, trying to be the best mother and grandmother she could be. But there was always this sadness in her, this sense of something missing. And I think if she'd known about you, if she'd known that part of her daughter lived on, it would have meant everything to her." Claire ended up accepting the trust fund, but it took her a while to come to terms with it. She didn't quit her job immediately or anything dramatic like that. She kept working for a few more months, trying to figure out who she was in all of this. The Whitmores were patient. They didn't push her or demand anything. They let her exist in their world at her own pace. Eventually, she quit, went back to school, and studied something she actually cared about instead of just working to survive. She stayed in touch with the family, becoming part of their lives in a way that felt real, not forced. That's how one offhand comment about a resemblance changed Claire's entire life.